So we are including a lot of deadlifting in this next 10-week phase here as part of the level method assessments that we're doing. So whether you love deadlifting or you hate it, chances are that there is some weak point in your deadlift that's causing you to either not be able to lift heavier or just dislike the movement entirely. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna break down each one and talk about them and discuss what you need to improve upon if you want to break past those barriers. So the first one we're going to talk about is going to be bar floating. So a lot of times this is actually just a setup error, and what's happening is when Nina goes ahead and sets up at the bar, okay, she's actually trying to generate momentum before gaining tension. So we want to think about bending the bar before she lifts. Okay, so go ahead and lift. All right, now go back down, and this time what I want you to do is let's go momentum before tension. Beautiful, okay. Yeah, opposite of beautiful, but we get the point. It's really hard for Nina to do this the wrong way. So what's gonna happen a lot of times is this actually tends to be more of a setup error where you're just trying to grip and rip the barbell before gaining tension. If this becomes a chronic issue where the bar is tending to float despite the fact that you're gaining tension, then what we're gonna look to is going to be the lats, the muscles in and around the scapulas, in as part of that setup. So when Nina goes ahead and sets up here, she's basically trying to create as much tension through her back, through her lats, right, through her hamstrings, through her quads as much as possible. If we find that even through this tension she goes to lift and that barbell wants to float, the culprit is almost always going to be that upper back and the lats. So another common fault that we see is the hips coming up before the bar. So in other words, when Nina pushes her feet into the ground, the bar doesn't rise, her hips are the first thing to initiate movement. Typically what we find with this is, especially for newer people or people that haven't lifted or deadlifted heavy before, this actually tends to be another setup error where when Nina goes ahead and sets up to the bar, she accidentally sets up too low to where she's going to sit her hips low as if she was doing a clean or almost like a half squat. And then when she goes to pull, the hips are actually going to set up into what her ideal leverages would be for the deadlift, all right? So what is helpful here is that if you can identify where the hips are rising to, that is a good indicator as to what your actual starting position should look like. Another way that you can do this, so go ahead and set up. So if Nina comes lower, and then she finds that her hips come up to a position, and then the bar leaves the ground, that ends up being, or tends to be, a better starting pulling position for her for the deadlift, okay? Another way that you can look at this, Nina, go ahead and stand up with the bar, yeah, is if I tell Nina to lower the bar to the ground, so go ahead and put the bar on the floor. Beautiful, look at her. So now she's back in that position where her hips came up to after that dynamic start. So it oftentimes ends up being the case that where you put the bar down is the optimal position, starting position for the deadlift or the next lift anyway. So there is one more thing I do want to touch on as it relates to the hips coming up. Sometimes for athletes that are a little bit stronger in the hamstrings, a little bit weaker in the quads, what ends up happening is, so Nina, go ahead and set up to the bar here. When joints are at smaller angles, it's more challenging to open them, all right? So as Nina's knees get more and more into this flexion, as she goes to lift off of the ground, if her quads are not strong enough in order to be able to open at this angle, what she'll do is she'll increase the angle of the knee to then pass the forces to the hip. So for people who are a little bit more hip dominant, hamstring dominant, or just weaker in their quads, maybe you can see this as they don't do well with things like lunges, don't do well with things like front squats, they're gonna have a greater tendency to wanna shoot the hips up and pass the forces off to the hip. So now we're gonna look at upper back rounding. Now this one's kind of similar to the bar floating, but it does tend to happen at different points in the deadlift. Generally, if people are going to have the bar float, it's gonna happen as soon as it leaves the floor, whereas oftentimes the upper back rounding starts to happen as people get closer to the knee. All right, so Nina's gonna go ahead and set up here. Don't make it too ugly, all right? So she's gonna set up, everything's gonna look good, so I want you to set up like you're about to do a good deadlift. Beautiful. Okay, now let's come up to the knee, and then we're just gonna kind of let that upper back go. Yep, scaredy cat. Okay, all right, go back to the floor. Okay, so the cue that I typically use with people here is you want to think about kind of squeezing oranges into the armpits, or think about putting your shoulder blades into your back pockets. A common mistake that people make is they want to think only about retraction, about pulling their shoulder blades back, but what they really want to think about is creating a neutral position for their scapulas, locking them in place, but then driving them into their back pockets, because what that's going to do is get all of the muscles of your back, from the erectors all the way through the muscles around the scapulas and your lats, contracting as one unit that's going to be able to stabilize and hold that barbell and back in place as you go ahead and perform that lift. So when Nina sets up here, what she's going to think about doing again is driving those scapulas into her back pockets, hiding the armpits or squeezing oranges in the armpits, okay? And then holding that tight as she keeps that tension all the way through the lift on the way up, and then again as she resets the bar, okay? Go ahead and relax. Now the challenge is that if we're resetting the bar in between lifts, those muscles turn off, so you have to reactivate them and get them back into position before you lift the bar again. And this is one of the challenges between touch and go lifts, where you can keep that tension, versus reset lifts where you have to find that tension once again. Okay, so now we're going to talk about is just going a little bit downstream. We're going to talk about lumbar spine. So this is when the lower back itself starts to round. Typically what you'll find is that this also comes with the athlete shifting their hips closer to center of mass rather than back and away from them. So it kind of like tucks their hips underneath and causes this like Jefferson curl Halloween cat look as they're deadlifting the bar. So don't make it too ugly, but go ahead and set up, and let's just do a single rep here. All right, so no tension, whole back rounding, yeah, and you see kind of the hips scoop through at the top. All right, so the obvious one is gonna be the spinal erector. So the muscles at Nina's lower back on either side of the spine, getting stronger in that area is gonna be able to help this tremendously. The other one is gonna be the opposite side of that. So going to be her lower abdominals and her ability to brace, so that she's kind of thinking about it as like filling up this entire cylinder and being able to hold it sturdy as she's lifting the bar. So core strength, lower back strength are gonna be big ones for this. But there's another sneaky one that catches up to a lot of people, which is going to be both lack of mobility in her hinge pattern. So a way that you could do this is just take a small step back. Okay, no barbell. Let's reach to the floor, trying to keep straight legs, and just reach as far as you can. So you can see that Nina's hinge pattern, and stop, so she's able to maintain a neutral spine all the way through this position, almost to the point where she could reach the floor. If she had longer arms, she could pull it off. But what that tells me then is that she's not lacking in her hinge pattern, in her hamstring flexibility, or in her hip mobility. So that's not going to be a culprit. But for people that when they reach to the floor, go ahead and reach, and this time keep your knees straight and then let your back kind of round as you reach. So if they keep their knees straight through the hinge pattern, but then you see this through the back, what that tells me is that's the position that they're going to default into when they're doing a deadlift, and they run out of range. The other part of this is that if you don't have access to that range with your hamstrings, you can't make it stronger. So positions we can't access are by nature weaker. So improving hip mobility and training strength at that range with doing things like RDLs and other movements where she can target the hamstrings at the lengthened positions will help improve that hip mobility and put her in a better position to not round at the lower back when she's doing deadlifts. Last one, when you have athletes with ginormous quads, like Nina, one of the tendencies with deadlifts is going to be to scoop the knees. So what happens is as she deadlifts, so go ahead and set up. Okay, and the bar gets just above the kneecap. What the athlete starts to do is then drive the knees forward and the hips through to try to finish. Okay, you can go ahead and set that down. But what tends to happen is as they get heavier and heavier, this becomes their this becomes the limitation. And as the bar gets above the knees and she tries to scoop, she gets to a point where the bar just halts. So go ahead and do a deadlift here and get above the knees, scoop, 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 stop. Yeah, you kept going, that's okay. So if they get to a point where they either can't lock the hips or lock the knees, or the upper back starts to give to the point where they can't fully lock out the bar, okay? In this case, it is always going to be the upper back and the glutes are going to be the biggest culprit. So part of the knee scooping through is the fact that you're trying to pass the buck from the hamstrings to the quads. You're also trying to bypass that finish with the glutes here, all right? So this is where things like hip thrust, lunges, again, the RDLs are gonna come into play to help improve that position. So go ahead and set up to the bar. So ideally, what we're able to do, you're just gonna do a nice and slow, good looking deadlift here, is as the bar gets above the knees, the hips stay back, the chest stays over the bar, and then we are going to drive the hips through at the top. The good news is we're including strength work specific to fixing every single one of these faults in your classes. What's important for you to remember is that you want to pay particular extra attention to the stuff that you know is going to benefit you the most. So if the bar is floating, it's going to be those rows, your pull-ups, the things that is going to strengthen your lats and upper back. If you're having your hips shoot up, it's going to be focusing again on that hamstring mobility, doing your RDLs, and really focusing on the muscles in and around your lower back and your core. If you're scooping, it's going to be, again, continuing to work on the hamstrings, driving those glutes through, fixing your upper back strength. So try to identify where your faults are, understand what is the strength work that you need to be here for, and your deadlift, I promise, is not only going to get better, you're just going to feel better on deadlift days in general.